Have you ever poured your entire soul into a dream, only to have your own family try to rip it away from you? I spent 9 years saving, working 2 jobs, skipping vacations to buy my perfect house. To my family, it wasn't my home. It was a free upgrade for my spoiled sister. They were about to learn a very expensive lesson. This is a story about drawing the ultimate boundary. Stick around to see how it all played out. The dripping started again. It was a soft, almost musical sound in the dead quiet of the house. A tiny plink, plink, plink that echoed in the cavernous space of my dream kitchen. Each drop felt like a coin being tossed into a well of debt I could never fill. It was the house's slow, agonizing heartbeat. A constant, nagging reminder of the plumbing estimate for $8. $200 that sat, flagged and menacing, in my email inbox. I swirled the oily film on the surface of my instant ramen with a cheap fork. The steam rose, fogging my glasses and momentarily blurring the spreadsheet on my laptop screen. It didn't matter. I had the numbers memorized. The angry red of the negative balance was burned into the back of my eyelids. 9 years. For 9 years, I had poured every spare dollar, every waking hour of my life, into the foundation of this house. It was supposed to be the finish line, the tangible proof that all the sacrifice had been worth it. I remembered the open house, walking through these empty rooms and seeing not just walls, but a future. I pictured myself baking bread in this kitchen, the scent filling the air. Not the sad, salty smell of MSG. I pictured hosting Thanksgiving. My family gathered around a huge dining table. Not me eating alone over a laptop. I pictured a life of stability, of peace, of having finally arrived. This house wasn't just wood and drywall, it was my fortress of solitude. My reward. Now, it felt like a gilded cage. The soaring ceilings that once felt majestic now just felt expensive to heat. The big backyard with its beautiful old oak tree was just another thing to maintain. Every creak of the hardwood floors sounded like another bill coming due. My phone buzzed on the granite countertop, the vibration aggressive against the cold stone. It was my mom. I watched her smiling face light up the screen. A picture from a family vacation I'd had to miss because of a freelance project. A project whose entire earnings had gone toward replacing the furnace 2 winters ago. I let it ring. The sound shrill and unwelcome. It went to voicemail. And not 2 seconds later, it started buzzing again. I knew the drill. Answering now would be less painful than the cascade of texts filled with guilt and passive aggression that would inevitably follow if I didn't. With a sigh that seemed to come from my very bones, I tapped the screen. Hi. Mom. Vanessa. Honey, I was just about to give up on you. She chirped. Her voice was a full octave higher than usual. A forced, sunny brightness that always set my teeth on edge. It was her I'm about to ask for something voice. A tone I had learned to dread. Listen. You absolutely have to come for dinner this Sunday. Everyone is going to be there. And I have the most wonderful surprise to announce. I rested my forehead against the cool, smooth surface of a kitchen cabinet. It felt solid. Real. Mom, I appreciate the thought, but I'm just so swamped. I have that big project for the Henderson account due. Nonsense. She cut me off, the brightness in her voice unwavering. You're always working. You'll work yourself into an early grave. One night off won't kill you. It's for family. And trust me, this is important. Really important. You won't want to miss it. 7 o'clock sharp. Don't be late. Click. She'd hung up. No room for argument. That was her way. I stood there in the silence, the dripping from the sink resuming its steady, mocking rhythm. A familiar feeling of weary resignation washed over me. It was a pattern as old as I could remember. My needs were always negotiable, while my family's wants were non-negotiable commands disguised as cheerful invitations. The rest of the week was colored by a low-grade dread. On Saturday afternoon, needing a distraction, I decided to finally go through the boxes from my college days stored in the garage. The air inside was cool and smelled of gasoline, sawdust, and time. I moved past my dad's old workbench, a half-finished birdhouse I'd started years ago sitting under a layer of dust, another dream deferred. My boxes, labeled college memories in my own neat handwriting, were tucked in a corner, but they were blocked. Stacked in front of them were 4 large, brand-new cardboard boxes, sealed with fresh tape. Scrawled across the side of each one in my sister's dramatic, loopy script were the words Marissa's winter clothes, and underneath, Marissa's books, Marissa's kitchen stuff fragile. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I remembered her phone call 2 weeks ago, her voice laced with that practiced, helpless tone. Can I just store a couple of things in your garage for a week or two? V. My new apartment is just so tiny. There's literally no room to breathe. I swear it's temporary. You're a lifesaver. A week or two. A couple of things. This wasn't a couple of things. This was the beginning of a colonization. I ran my hand over the rough cardboard. A sudden, sharp anger flaring in my chest. How many of Marissa's temporary problems had become my permanent responsibilities? The unpaid phone bill she swore she'd pay me back for. The car repair I'd covered when she was between jobs. This wasn't storage. This was an invasion. I executed one small favor at a time. Walking into my parents' house the next evening, the feeling of being an outsider was immediate and overwhelming. The air was thick with the smell of roast chicken and perfume. The good china, the one with the delicate gold trim that only saw the light of day on major holidays. It was laid out on the gleaming dining room table. Polished silverware and my father's expensive crystal glasses, usually kept behind lock and key, were set at every place. This wasn't a dinner, it was a state function. And holding court at the head of the table, in the carved oak chair that had always been my father's, was my sister. She was glowing, wearing a new dress I knew she couldn't afford. My parents were orbiting her like planets around a sun. My dad, already on his second glass of wine. I was fussing over the champagne chilling in a silver bucket. My mom was adjusting the silk runner on the table, her movements quick and nervous and excited. I felt a sudden, bizarre urge to turn and walk right back out the door. Vanessa. You're here, my mom exclaimed, her eyes flicking over my simple work blouse and slacks with a flicker of disapproval. She glided over and gave me a kiss on the cheek that was all air, and Chanel no. Woo. Go on. Find your seat. You're next to Aunt Sarah. Of course, I was seated at the far end of the table, the social equivalent of Siberia. Aunt Sarah gave me a tight, searching smile, her eyes full of a knowing pity that made my skin crawl. The dinner was an elaborate stage play, and I was the only one without a script. Marissa was the star, recounting dramatic tales about her retail job, making mundane customer interactions sound like epic sagas. Everyone laughed at the right moments. Their faces turned toward her, captivated. I watched them, a perfect tableau of a happy, supportive family, and felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if I were watching them through a pane of glass. Finally, as my mom cleared the dinner plates, Marissa tapped her fork against her crystal glass. The ringing sound silenced the room instantly. She took a theatrical breath, her eyes sparkling with unshed tears of pure joy. "So," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "I have some truly amazing, life-changing news for everyone." Her gaze swept the adoring faces around the table before it landed. With deliberate weight. "On me. I'm moving in with Vanessa next week." The silence in the room was absolute. My own breathing seemed to stop. She said it with such finality, such unshakable certainty, as if she were announcing a fact of nature, like the sun rising in the east. She didn't wait for a reaction. She just kept talking, the words spilling out in a rush of excitement. "I've already started packing. And honestly, it's going to be so much better for both of us. We'll need to clear out that big closet in the hallway for my shoes. You don't really use it anyway." "Right, and I was thinking we could paint the living room a nice sage green. The beige you have is just so drab." That's when the champagne cork popped. The sound was obscenely loud. A violent punctuation to my sister's monologue. My father, his face red with pride and wine, raised the foaming bottle. "To new beginnings," he roared, filling Marissa's outstretched glass first. My mother clapped her hands together, her face a mask of maternal bliss. "Oh, it will be so wonderful," she gushed to Aunt Sarah, though her voice was pitched for the whole table to hear. "Vanessa gets so lonely in that big, empty house all by herself. It's not healthy. She'll finally have some life in the place. It will be so much better for her to have her sister with her." They had a whole narrative written for me. I wasn't a person. I was a solution to my sister's housing problem. My home wasn't a home, it was a resource to be allocated by the family council. They all raised their glasses. To Marissa, my dad toasted, his eyes shining. To Marissa, the chorus echoed. Glasses clinked. Laughter bubbled up. But my glass remained on the table, full and untouched. My hand rested beside it, flat against the cool, smooth wood. I felt a strange detachment, the hot flush of anger and humiliation giving way to an icy calm. The noise of their celebration seemed to fade, becoming a distant buzz. In that moment, something inside me, a part that had spent a lifetime trying to please them, trying to earn my place at this table, simply broke. It wasn't a loud snap, but a quiet, clean severance. I watched my father pour himself another glass. I watched my mother brush a piece of lint from Marissa's shoulder. I watched them all exist in this shared delusion they had constructed. A world where my life, my work, my dream, was nothing more than a convenient asset. Slowly, deliberately, I wiped my mouth with my linen napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table. Every movement was measured. I reached into my purse, the soft snap of the magnetic clasp sounding like a gavel in the quiet space that had formed around me. My fingers closed around a thick manila envelope. I picked up my water glass and took a small sip, then placed it back down. The sound, a solid clink against the polished wood, was sharper this time. It cut through the celebratory hum. One by one, their eyes turned to me. The smiles on their faces faltered. "Actually," I said, and my voice was different. It was lower than usual, completely level, stripped of all emotion. It was the voice of a stranger. "I have an announcement to make. 2. I drew the envelope from my purse. It felt heavy, substantial. I placed it squarely in the center of the table. "It's plain," business-like form, a stark contrast to the festive scene. This, I said, sliding it across the table toward my father, whose hand had frozen mid-air on its way to the champagne bottle. I waited for him to read the bold letters at the top of the page, Residential Real Estate Purchase Agreement. I sold the house. The deal closed last Tuesday. The new owners are very eager to move in. I let my gaze travel from my father's stunned face to my mother's open-mouthed horror, and finally, to my sister. All of us, I continued, my voice unwavering, including all of Marissa's things currently stored in my garage, have exactly 30 days to be out. I leaned back in my chair, a strange, weightless feeling spreading through me. I looked directly at my sister, whose face had gone from triumphant to ash-white. So, yes, I said softly, to new beginnings. My new beginning. The only reply was the high, sharp, splintering sound of Marissa's champagne glass as it slipped from her nerveless fingers and exploded across the priceless hardwood floor. For a long second, no one moved. The world seemed to be frozen in that single, sharp sound of shattering glass. The glittering shards lay scattered across the dark wood of the floor, catching the light from the chandelier like a constellation of fallen stars. A puddle of champagne was already seeping into the fibers of my mother's prized Persian rug. Apale. Spreading stain. Then, the tableau broke. It was my father who moved first. He slammed his fist down on the dining table, and the good china rattled. A sound like chattering teeth. The jovial, wine-flushed mask was gone, replaced by a deep, mottled red that crawled up from his neck. His eyes, which had been sparkling with pride moments before, were now narrowed into hard, furious slits. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the room. "You pull a stunt like this, you think this is a joke." He gestured wildly at the legal document sitting on the table. "You will cancel this. First thing in the morning. You will call your realtor and you will cancel this insanity." "I can't," I said, my voice still quiet, still eerily calm. "It's a legally binding contract. Dad, the buyers have already put down their deposit. It's done." My mother finally found her voice. A high-pitched, horrified wail. She rushed to Marissa's side, who had sunk back into her chair and was now sobbing, her shoulders shaking. "Vanessa, how could you?" my mother cried, stroking Marissa's hair. "How could you be so cruel? We made a promise to your sister. She was counting on you. Are you really going to throw your own family out onto the street?" The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. My own family. As if I wasn't part of it. As if my sole purpose within it was to serve as a safety net for everyone else. The ice in my veins held firm. I slowly reached for my phone, which was sitting beside my plate. With a few taps, I pulled up an album I had created just that morning. I turned the screen toward them. It was a grid of screenshots from a shared Pinterest board I had discovered last month. A board my mother and Aunt Sarah had created. The title was Marissa's New Room. It was filled with images of pastel paints, bohemian-style furniture, and decor ideas pinned directly onto pictures of my master bedroom, my living room, my office. "This doesn't look like a temporary arrangement," I said, my voice flat. "This looks like a hostile takeover. You weren't planning on Marissa moving in with me. You were planning on her moving in. And me moving over." My mother waved a dismissive hand, not even glancing at the phone. "Oh, that was just a silly game. We were having fun. Dreaming a little for Marissa." You're taking everything so seriously, it doesn't mean anything. Her ability to deny the evidence right in front of her face was breathtaking. They weren't just liars, they were artists of delusion. They had constructed a reality where their actions had no consequences, where my feelings and my property were irrelevant. So moving her boxes into my garage was part of the game. Too, I asked. That hit a nerve. My father's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, his weight on his knuckles on the table. A bull about to charge. You watch your tone, he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You think you're so independent now? With your house and your big decisions? Have you forgotten who's been doing your taxes for the last 10 years, who makes sure you get every possible deduction? It's a very complicated system. A person could make a lot of mistakes on their own. The threat was unmistakable. It was a Chekhov's gun he had kept loaded for years. And he was finally pointing it at me. The man who was supposed to protect me was threatening to use his knowledge to harm me. From the corner of the room, I heard my Aunt Sarah mutter to my uncle. We were just going to move the rest of her things in on Tuesday while she was at work. As a surprise, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of it all was what finally broke through my calm. I stood up. The legs of my chair scraped against the floor. A harsh, grating sound. I'm leaving, I said. I didn't look at any of them. I picked up my purse and walked toward the door, my footsteps echoing in the sudden, tense silence. I didn't run. I walked. It was the longest walk of my life. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. A physical weight of shock and fury. I didn't turn around until I was out the door, pulling it shut behind me on the wreckage of my old life. The next morning, the siege began. My phone started buzzing at 7 a.m. and didn't stop. It was a coordinated assault. First, my aunt called, her voice thick with disappointment, telling me I had broken my mother's heart. Then a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years texted me a long paragraph about the sanctity of family. The messages and calls kept coming. A relentless barrage of guilt and accusation, all painting me as a cold, heartless monster. Then came Marissa's public volley. She posted on Facebook. A beautifully filtered, teary-eyed selfie. The caption was a masterpiece of passive aggression. Sometimes the people who are supposed to be your safe harbor are the ones who create the storm. Feeling so lost right now. But I know that with faith and the love of my true family, I'll find my way, praying for strength and for hearts to soften. Within an hour, it had dozens of sympathetic comments. The first one, of course, was from my mother, my brave. Sweet girl. Mommy is always here for you. We'll get through this together. The attack escalated, breaching the walls of my professional life that afternoon. My colleague, Lisa, approached my desk, her face a mask of worried concern. She leaned in conspiratorially. Hey, Vanessa, is everything okay? She whispered. I don't want to pry, but I ran into your sister at the coffee shop this morning. She seemed really upset. She told me, well, she said you were selling your house and that she might, become homeless. My face burned with a hot, shameful fire. It was one thing to be vilified by my family. It was another to have their twisted narratives seep into my workplace. The one place where I was seen as competent and in control. Marissa wasn't just playing the victim, she was actively trying to ruin my reputation. That night was the worst. I sat on the floor of my living room, surrounded by the ghosts of my dream. I had started packing, and the room was a chaotic landscape of cardboard boxes and packing tape. Each box I filled felt like I was dismantling a piece of myself. The voices of the past 24 hours swirled in my head: my father's threat, my mother's tears, Lisa's pitying eyes, the syrupy sweet sympathy on Marissa's Facebook page. For the first time since I'd made the decision, a sliver of doubt crept in. Was I the monster they all said I was? Had I gone too far? The loneliness of my big, empty house pressed in on me, suffocating me. I wrapped my arms around my knees, feeling small and utterly alone, a villain in a story I never wanted to be a part of. Just as the self-pity threatened to swallow me whole, my phone pinged with a text message. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another digital arrow from a relative, but the name on the screen was Dorothy, my mother's oldest friend. A woman who had known me since I was a child and had been at the dinner party. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I opened it. The message was short, but it was a lifeline. It read, "I saw what you did last night. Don't let them make you doubt yourself for 1 second. It was the bravest thing I've ever seen. Good for you." I read the text again. And again. The words were a balm on my raw, frayed nerves. It was the first piece of external validation I had received. A single voice telling me I wasn't crazy. It was proof that someone else had seen the same reality I had. A tiny spark of resolve flickered back to life inside me. Dorothy's text didn't just give me comfort, it gave me an idea. The next morning, I made a call. Not to my family, but to Barbara, a sharp, no-nonsense financial advisor I'd met through a networking group. I sat at my kitchen island, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, and I told her everything. The 9 years of saving, the crushing repair bills, the dinner party, the threats. I laid it all out, expecting judgment, or at least pity. What I got was logic. "Vanessa," she said, her voice calm and professional through the phone. "Let's take the emotion out of it for a minute and look at the numbers. The numbers don't lie. Based on your income, your debt, and the carrying costs of that property, you were drowning. Selling that house wasn't a cruel act. It was an act of financial survival. It was the smartest decision you could have made." Hearing my desperate, emotional choice framed in cold, hard, logical terms felt like being pulled onto solid ground after being lost at sea. "As for your father's threat," she continued, "it's just that, a threat, a bully's tactic. I'm going to email you the contact information for a new accountant. A real pit bull. Let's have her take a look at your last few years of returns. My guess is your father has been getting more of a benefit from doing your taxes than you have." She also confirmed that the realtor I'd used, Thomas, was one of the best in the city for quick, discreet sales. "You're not alone in this. And you've made all the right moves so far," she assured me before hanging up. When the call ended, I felt a profound shift inside me. The fear and doubt had been burned away by the clean fire of logic and strategy. My family had declared war, assuming I was the same compliant, conflict-averse person I had always been. They were about to find out they were wrong. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was building a fortress of facts. And I was finally ready for battle. I spent the rest of the day gathering my ammunition, downloading bank statements, printing out the repair invoices, taking screenshots. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of control, of power. My home was quiet. The phone had finally stopped ringing. And then, a sound shattered the peace. It wasn't a knock. It was a hammering. A hard, aggressive, repeated thump, thump, thump against my front door that made my heart leap into my throat. It was the sound of a summons, of an army at the gates. I crept to the peephole. my breath caught in my chest. On my doorstep, their faces distorted by the fisheye lens into grotesque masks of fury, stood my father, my mother, and Marissa. They hadn't called. They hadn't texted. They had just shown up, ready for a confrontation. The siege wasn't over. They had brought the fight right to my door. For a moment, I just stood there, watching their distorted faces through the peephole. A primal instinct, honed over a lifetime of avoiding their drama, screamed at me to stay quiet, to pretend I wasn't home, to wait until they gave up and went away. But the woman who had made that phone call to Barbara, the woman who had gathered her evidence into neat, labeled folders, was not the same woman who used to hide from them. The ice in my veins from that disastrous dinner party was still there. A solid core of resolve. I took one deep, centering breath. Then another. I smoothed down my shirt, unlocked the deadbolt with a loud, definitive clack, and pulled the door open. They stood there, blinking in the sudden light of the hallway. A united front of fury. My mother was in the lead, her face pinched with a righteous indignation that had been her primary expression for days. My father stood just behind her, his arms crossed over his chest like a bouncer, and Marissa, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, peeked out from behind my mother's shoulder. The very picture of a wronged waif. "You have some nerve." "Not answering your phone," my mother began, her voice a sharp staccato. She tried to push past me into the house. But I didn't move. I held my ground, my hand resting on the edge of the door. "This is not a good time," I said, my voice even. "Not a good time," my father scoffed, stepping forward. "We are your family, Vanessa. We will not be ignored. We are here to talk some sense into you and put an end to this ridiculous, selfish tantrum." "A tantrum," I repeated, a humorless smile touching my lips. "That's what you think this is?" I looked at each of them in turn, my gaze lingering for a moment on Marissa's expertly crafted expression of misery. "Fine. You want to talk, let's talk." I stepped back, swinging the door wide open. "Come in. Since you're all here, let's have one final family meeting." The word final hung in the air, and I saw a flicker of uncertainty in my mother's eyes. But her anger quickly overrode it. She swept into the house as if she owned it, my father and sister trailing in her wake like obedient soldiers. They stopped in the living room, a chaotic mess of half-packed boxes, and looked around with distaste. "What a mess," my mother sniffed. "You see what you've done, you've destroyed your beautiful home." "I'm not destroying it," I said, walking past them toward the dining room. "I'm liberating it. And myself. The meeting is in here." I led them to the dining table, the same table where I had eaten countless meals of instant ramen while staring at a mountain of bills. But tonight, it was set for a different kind of feast. Instead of plates, the polished wood surface was covered with a series of neat, precise stacks of paper and manila folders, arranged like place settings at a corporate board meeting. My laptop was at the head of the table, open and waiting. They hesitated at the doorway, their bravado faltering as they took in the scene. This wasn't the ambush they had planned. The power dynamic had shifted the moment they walked through my door. "Sit down," I said. It wasn't a request. My father opened his mouth to protest, but then closed it. Something in my tone, something new and unyielding, made him think twice. He pulled out a chair and sat heavily. My mother followed suit, perching on the edge of her seat, as if it might be electrified. Marissa, after a moment's hesitation, slid into the chair beside her. her eyes darting nervously from the folders to my face. I remained standing at the head of the table, a prosecutor before the accused. I let the silence stretch, letting them stew in their own discomfort. Then, I began. I picked up the first document from the stack on my left. It was a thick invoice, creased from being opened and refolded many times. I placed it gently in the center of the table, turning it so they could read the header. Evidence item number 1. I said, my voice clinical. This is the bill for the roof replacement from last fall. As you can see, the total came to $11,450. I let them absorb the number. I asked for help with this. I called you, Mom, after a storm. When water was literally dripping onto my bedroom floor, you said you were a little tight on cash, but that you'd see what you could do. The next day, you posted pictures on Facebook of the new patio furniture you'd just bought. My mother flushed. That was on sale. It was a completely different thing. I didn't acknowledge her interruption. I simply moved on, picking up the next set of papers. Evidence item number 2. This is the $8,200 estimate for the plumbing. The one that required them to tear up the lawn to replace the main line. And this, I added, placing another invoice beside it, is the $5,000 bill for the new furnace I had to install 2 winters ago, when the old one died in the middle of a blizzard. I looked directly at my father. I remember that week clearly, because you called me to complain that Marissa's landlord was raising her rent by $50, and you were worried about how she would manage. Your sister has always had a harder time with money, he blustered. It's not the same. You're right, I said calmly. It's not. I reached for the thickest folder. Which brings me to evidence item number 3, the Marissa Fund. I opened the folder and began sliding bank statements across the table, one after another, like dealing a hand of cards. Each one had a transaction highlighted in yellow, $500 to cover her car insurance, yuan, $200 for her security deposit, $300 to pay off her credit card. After you called me, Mom, saying she was too embarrassed to ask for help herself. Over the last 4 years, I have given her, at your direct request, over $7,000. Money. I now realize that I should have been putting into my own emergency fund. Marissa finally spoke, her voice a childish whine. You're making it sound so dramatic. It's not my fault you bought a house you couldn't afford. You're just twisting everything to make me look bad because you're jealous. Before I could respond, my phone, which I had placed on the table, began to ring. The screen lit up with Dorothy's name. It was exactly 7:15 p.m., just as we had planned. Excuse me, I said, holding up a hand. I have to take this. I answered and put the call on speaker. Vanessa. Dear. Am I interrupting Dorothy's calm? Steady voice filled the room. Actually, Dorothy, your timing is perfect. I said, I'm just having a little family meeting. You're on speakerphone. Oh well. Hello everyone, she said, a cool edge to her voice. I just wanted to call and say, Vanessa, that I've been thinking about our conversation. And about that dinner party? I've known your family for 30 years. I've watched Vanessa work 2 jobs through college while Marissa went on spring break trips. I watched Vanessa save every penny for a decade to buy this house, while you all co-signed on a brand new car for Marissa as a graduation present. To sit there and watch you try to take this house away from her was one of the most shameful things I have ever witnessed. What you are doing is not just unfair, it's morally wrong. A stunned silence followed her words. My mother looked as if she'd been slapped. Before any of them could formulate a response, a series of notifications chimed from their phones, almost in unison. My mother, father, and Marissa all glanced down at their screens. "What is this?" my mother asked, confused. "That," I said, "is an email from my financial advisor, Barbara. She took the liberty of running some projections for me. If you open the attachment, you'll see a simple chart. The red line shows my financial trajectory if I had kept this house. It ends in bankruptcy within 3 years. The green line shows my financial future now that I've sold it. It ends in a comfortable retirement. The numbers don't lie. This wasn't a tantrum. It was a rescue mission." My father stared at his phone, his face a thundercloud. He had been outmaneuvered and he knew it. He fell back on his last, most powerful weapon. "This is all just numbers and nonsense," he snarled, pushing his phone away. "You've forgotten the most important number, the one on your tax return. The one I control. You go through with this, and I promise you, you will regret it. Come next April." The Chekhov's gun. The final threat. The old me would have crumbled, but the new me was ready. I met his glare without flinching. "I'm so glad you brought that up, Dad," I said, my voice dangerously sweet. "I've hired a new accountant. A wonderful woman named Ms. Tai. Albright. She's a forensic specialist. Actually, she's reviewing my last 10 years of returns right now. She called me this afternoon, very concerned. She mentioned something about improperly claimed dependents and questionable business expense deductions related to your consulting firm. She said she'll probably need to schedule a meeting with you and the IRS to clear it all up." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The color drained from my father's face, leaving a pale, doughy mask. The blustering rage vanished, replaced by a raw, primal fear. His power over me, the weapon he had held to my head for my entire adult life, had just been dismantled and turned back on him. He slumped in his chair, suddenly looking old and small. The final, killing blow, however, came from an unexpected direction. My Aunt Sarah, who had apparently driven over with them and had been sitting silently at the end of the table this whole time, finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a knife. She wasn't looking at me or my parents. She was looking at Marissa. "Marissa," she said, her voice laced with a weary exasperation I had never heard from her before. "Why don't you just go live with your parents for a while? They have 2 empty bedrooms now that the boys are gone. You could save up some money. Get on your own 2 feet." It was a simple, logical question, and in that moment, it was the most damning indictment of all. It shattered the central premise of their entire argument that Marissa was a helpless victim with nowhere else to go. It exposed the entire scheme for what it was, a greedy, entitled grab for something she hadn't earned. The alliance was broken. The last thread of their justification had snapped. Marissa looked from my aunt's face to my mother's, then to my father's, searching for an ally. For someone to defend her, she found nothing but stunned, defeated silence. Her face crumpled. It wasn't the slow, elegant sadness of her Facebook selfie. It was the ugly, contorted face of a child whose favorite toy has just been taken away. A terrible, guttural sob ripped from her throat. "I can't believe this," she shrieked, shoving her chair back so hard it crashed to the floor. "You're all against me, you all hate me." And with that, she turned and ran, stumbling through the living room, out the front door, and into the night. Her ragged sobs trailing behind her, my mother started to rise, to go after her. But my father put a hand on her arm, his face still ashen. They just sat there, frozen in the wreckage, the damning evidence of their failure laid out on the table before them. The war was over, and for the first time in my life, I had won. The sound of Marissa's car engine roaring to life, followed by the squeal of tires on asphalt, was the only thing that broke the spell. It was a final, childish shriek of rage fading into the night. When it was gone, an unnatural quiet fell over the room. A silence so profound it seemed to have weight and texture. It absorbed the light from the chandelier, dulled the glint of the crystal glasses, and settled over the three of us at the table like a heavy shroud. My father stared at the damning paperwork scattered before him, his face a pasty gray. He wasn't looking at me. He seemed to be looking through the table, through the floor, into some private abyss of his own making. My mother, for her part, was tracing the rim of her untouched water glass with a trembling finger, her eyes fixed on the empty chair where Marissa had been sitting. The fight had gone out of them completely, leaving behind a hollow, brittle shell. Aunt Sarah quietly pushed her chair back, the sound a soft scrape in the stillness. I think we should go," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. She helped my mother to her feet as if she were a frail old woman. My mother moved stiffly, automatically, her eyes still vacant. My father rose without a word. His shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. They didn't look at me as they shuffled out of the room. Not once. I listened to their footsteps retreat down the hall. The soft click of the front door opening, and then closing. And then, there was only the silence. I stood there alone in my dining room, surrounded by the weapons of my victory. I expected to feel a surge of triumph, a rush of righteous satisfaction. But I didn't. What I felt, in that moment, was a bone-deep exhaustion that went all the way to my soul. I wasn't a warrior celebrating a win. I was a soldier standing on an empty battlefield after the war was over, acutely aware of the cost of it all. I slowly began to gather the papers, my hands moving with a strange, detached precision. Invoice by invoice, statement by statement, I put my life back into its folders. Then, I walked through the house. My house. For a few more weeks, and turned off the lights, one by one, until I was standing in the dark. For the first time in 9 years, the dripping from the kitchen sink had finally stopped. The day of the move was gray and overcast, the sky threatening a rain that never came. The house felt like a hollowed-out skeleton, its rooms echoing with every footstep, its walls covered in the pale ghosts of pictures that were no longer there. My life was packed into a mountain of cardboard boxes that filled the living room. I was methodically taping up the last one when my doorbell rang. It was Dorothy and Thomas. The realtor. Dorothy was holding a large box of donuts, and Thomas was carrying 2 thermos containers. "Reinforcements have arrived," Dorothy announced with a warm smile that didn't demand one in return. "Coffee. Black. And coffee with an obscene amount of cream and sugar. Take your pick." Thomas nodded, his expression kind. I cleared my morning schedule. "You point. I lift. It's that simple." And they did. For the next 5 hours, they worked. They didn't ask intrusive questions. They didn't offer platitudes or unsolicited advice. They simply helped. They carried boxes, disassembled furniture, and argued playfully about the best way to pack the moving truck. When we were all exhausted and covered in a fine layer of dust, We sat on the floor of the empty living room and ate pizza straight from the box. Just as Dorothy had promised, you know, Thomas said, taking a bite of a pepperoni slice. I've overseen hundreds of moves. They're always emotional. An ending and a beginning all at once. He looked around the empty room. Then at me. I think your beginning is going to be a good one. In that moment, sitting on the floor with these two people who had offered their help with no strings attached, no expectation of anything in return, I finally understood what true support felt like. It wasn't loud or demanding. It was quiet, practical, and unconditional. It was a donut and a cup of coffee. It was the simple, profound gift of someone showing up. 3 months later, I was sitting in a pool of late afternoon sunlight that streamed through the large window of my new townhouse. It was a smaller space, but it was filled with light. There were no strange drips. No creaking floorboards that sounded like impending doom. Novost. Empty rooms that echoed with loneliness. It was cozy. It was manageable. It was mine. On the coffee table in front of me was a half-finished cup of tea and a textbook. The Art of Composition, a Photographer's Guide. I had finally signed up for the online photography class I had been dreaming of taking for years. My new camera. A sleek, beautiful machine I'd bought with the first surplus from my new anyway, much healthier budget, was in my hands. I was practicing adjusting the aperture, marveling at the way the focus shifted, the way the world sharpened and blurred with a simple twist of the lens. My bank account, for the first time in my adult life, had a comma in it. A comfortable, reassuring comma that wasn't immediately followed by a negative sign. I was breathing again. I hadn't even realized I'd been holding my breath for nearly a decade. That's when my phone rang. I saw my mother's name on the screen and my body tensed. An involuntary, conditioned response. I almost let it go to voicemail. But some new, calmer part of me decided to answer. Hello, I said. My voice neutral. Vanessa. She began. And her voice was different. The sharp, brittle edge was gone. It was quiet. Hesitant. I hope I'm not calling it a bad time. It's fine. Mom. What's up? There was a long pause on the other end, and I could hear her take a shaky breath. I wanted to say I'm sorry, she said, the words coming out in a rush, as if she were afraid they would get stuck if she said them too slowly. I was wrong. The way I treated you. The way we all took you for granted. It was wrong. I let my fear for Marissa's future blind me to what we were doing to yours. There's no excuse for it, but I am truly, deeply sorry. It was the first real apology I had ever received from her. It wasn't followed by a but, or a justification, or a subtle shift of blame. It was just an apology, clean and unadorned. Thank you, Mom, I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. I appreciate that. Your father. He feels the same way, she added softly. He's just... You know how he is. He's ashamed. We talked for a few more minutes. A stilted but civil conversation. Before we hung up, I said, Mom, tell Marissa something for me. A friend of mine is a hiring manager at a marketing firm downtown. They're looking for an entry-level coordinator. The salary is good. More than enough to afford a decent apartment on her own. I'll text you her contact info. It's up to Marissa to make the call. A week later, my mother called to tell me that Marissa, After much prodding, had sent in her resume. 2 weeks after that, she called to tell me, in a voice filled with a kind of bewildered pride, that Marissa had gotten the job. She was learning how to create a budget. She was looking at apartments with a roommate. She was, for the first time in her life, taking the first wobbly steps toward standing on her own. My parents, in turn, they were learning to ask both their daughters how their day was, not just the one who screamed the loudest. The entire dysfunctional ecosystem of our family was slowly, painfully, beginning to rebalance itself. One sunny Saturday, my doorbell rang. It was Dorothy, holding a beautifully wrapped gift. A housewarming present, she said, handing it to me. It's a little late, but I was waiting for the right one. I unwrapped it carefully. It was a simple, elegant silver picture frame, but instead of one opening, it had two, side by side. In the left pane, she had placed a beautiful photo of my old house, taken on a perfect summer day when the oak tree was in full leaf. It was the dream, captured in all its impossible, expensive glory. And in the right pane, she had put a picture she had secretly taken of me a few weeks earlier, sitting in my new sunlit living room, my camera in my lap. A look of quiet, focused contentment on my face. It was the reality. I ran my fingers over the cool glass, my throat tightening with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Dorothy, I whispered. It's perfect. One door closes, she said softly, squeezing my shoulder, and a better one opens. You didn't just buy a new house, Vanessa. You bought a new life. Later that evening, I placed the frame on my new bookshelf. I stood back and looked at the two images. The old house was beautiful, a monument to my grit and determination. I would always be proud of the work it took to get it. But it was also a symbol of my sacrifice. A two of the person I had to become to keep it anxious, exhausted, and always putting myself last. The woman in the second picture, the one with the camera, was someone different. She was lighter. She was calmer. She was free. I realized then that the opposite of enabling wasn't abandonment, it was boundaries. The line between helping someone and harming them is drawn the moment you start sacrificing your own well-being for their comfort. I hadn't destroyed my family. I had forced it to heal. And in the process, I had finally, after all these years, come home to myself.